The gunshot echoed through the frozen valley 3 seconds before the knock came. Caleb Rourke's hand found his rifle in the darkness, his breath visible in the cabin's cold air. For 15 years, no one had knocked on that door. No one even knew it existed. But tonight, someone was dying on his porch, and they'd brought their ghosts with them. The storm screamed. The knock came again, weaker this time. Whatever waited outside would shatter the silence he'd built his entire life to protect. This is the story of a man who chose solitude, and the family that chose him back. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And if it moves you, hit that like button. Now, let's begin where it all started. The night the mountain stopped being his alone. The storm had been building for 3 days. Caleb Rourke had watched it roll in from the western peaks like an army of gray ghosts, swallowing the ridgelines one by one until even the closest pines disappeared into the white fury. He'd seen storms before. 15 winters alone on this mountain had taught him to read weather the way some men read books. But this one felt different, angrier, like the mountain itself was trying to shake something loose. He'd spent the afternoon reinforcing the cabin's shutters and stacking firewood against the inner wall where it wouldn't freeze. His traps would be buried by morning, useless until the thaw. That meant living off his stores, smoked venison, dried beans, the small root cellar he'd dug into the hillside. Enough for one man for months. It had always been enough for one man. The cabin sat in a narrow valley carved between two granite faces, accessible only by a switchback trail that disappeared under snow for half the year. Caleb had chosen this place specifically because it was the kind of nowhere that swallowed men whole. The kind of place where you could live and die without the world ever knowing you'd existed. That was exactly what he wanted. He'd built the cabin himself, log by log, in the summer of 1868. Cut the timber from the north slope where the trees grew straight and tall. Chinked the gaps with clay and moss. The door hung on leather hinges he'd made from a bear he'd killed his second winter. It wasn't much. A single room with a stone fireplace, a rope bed in the corner, hooks on the walls for his pelts and gear. But it was his. No one else's name had ever been spoken inside these walls. That first knock came at exactly 9:15. Caleb was sitting in his chair by the fire, repairing a marten trap whose spring had rusted through. The wind had reached a howling pitch, loud enough that he almost missed it. Almost. But 15 years of listening to silence had made his ears sharp for any sound that didn't belong. He set down the trap slowly. His hand moved to the Sharp's rifle leaning against the stone mantel. The knock came again. Weaker this time. Not the demanding pound of someone trying to force entry. This was the sound of someone using the last of their strength. Caleb crossed to the door in 4 long strides. He was a tall man, built lean and hard from years of hauling traps through deep snow. His beard was shot through with gray now, though he was only 43. His eyes were the color of winter ice, pale, sharp, and difficult to read. "Who's there?" His voice came out rough from disuse. He sometimes went weeks without speaking aloud. No answer, just the scream of wind through the pines. He threw the bolt and cracked the door open 6 inches, rifle raised. The woman collapsed forward into the frame. Caleb caught her by pure instinct, his free hand shooting out to grab her shoulder before she hit the ground. She was impossibly light, as if the storm had already hollowed her out. Snow covered her like a burial shroud. Her lips were blue. "Please." The word came out as barely a whisper. "My children." That's when he saw them. 2 small shapes huddled against the porch railing, wrapped together in a single blanket that had frozen stiff. The older one, a boy, had his arms locked around the smaller child, trying to shield her from the wind. Their faces were ghost white, their eyes sunken and distant. For one frozen moment, Caleb stood there in the doorway with the woman's weight against his chest and the cold pouring in and his entire carefully constructed life threatening to crack apart. Every instinct he'd cultivated for 15 years screamed at him to close the door. Send them back into the storm, protect what was his. But the boy's eyes found his. They weren't pleading. They weren't even afraid anymore. They were simply empty, accepting. The boy had already decided they were going to die. He was just waiting for it to happen. "Hell!" Caleb shouldered the rifle and bent down, scooping the woman up in his arms. "Get inside, both of you, now!" The boy moved like he was underwater, everything slow and dreamlike. He half dragged, half carried the little girl through the door. She didn't make a sound. That was the worst part. She didn't even cry. Caleb kicked the door shut behind them and carried the woman to his bed. She weighed nothing. Her clothes were soaked through, frozen in places. Her breathing was shallow and rapid. Hypothermia. Advanced. He'd seen men die from exposure before. She had maybe an hour. "Get those wet clothes off her," he barked at the boy. "Everything. You understand? Everything wet has to come off or she'll die." The boy stared at him with those hollow eyes. "Did you hear me?" I don't..." The boy's voice cracked. He couldn't have been more than 10. Caleb swore under his breath and started working, his hands moving with the efficiency of someone who'd treated frostbite and exposure dozens of times, on himself. He pulled off the woman's frozen shawl, her coat, the thin dress underneath that was more ice than fabric. Her skin was mottled blue and white. Bad. Very bad. He grabbed blankets from his chest and wrapped her tightly, then dragged her close to the fire. The boy and girl stood frozen by the door, watching with wide, uncomprehending eyes. "Your clothes," Caleb said, more gently this time. "You're both soaked through. Take them off and wrap up in those blankets." He pointed to his woodpile where he kept spare furs and wool. "I won't look, but if you don't do it, you'll lose your fingers and toes. Maybe worse." The boy finally moved, pulling his sister toward the blankets. Caleb turned his back and focused on the woman. Her pulse was weak and thready. He packed heated stones from the fire's edge against her sides, careful not to burn her. Hypothermia was a delicate thing. Warm them too fast and their heart could stop. Too slow, and they'd slip away anyway. Behind him, he heard the rustle of wet fabric hitting the floor. The little girl whimpered once, soft as a kitten. "Shh, Lily," the boy whispered. "It's okay. We're safe now." Were they? Caleb wasn't sure what safe meant anymore, but he kept working, rubbing the woman's arms and legs to encourage blood flow, checking her breathing every few seconds. 15 minutes passed. The color began to return to her face, slowly, like watercolor bleeding into paper. Her breathing deepened. Her eyelids fluttered, but didn't open. Caleb sat back on his heels, releasing a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. She'd live, probably, if infection didn't set in, if her body didn't give up from pure exhaustion. He turned to check on the children. They were huddled together against the far wall, wrapped in his bearskin and a wool blanket he'd traded for 3 winters ago. The boy had his arm around his sister, protective. Both of them watched Caleb with expressions that weren't quite trust, but were close to something like hope. "You got names?" Caleb asked. The boy swallowed hard. "Jonah. This is Lily." "How old?" "I'm 10. She's 6. "Where'd you come from?" Jonah's eyes dropped to the floor. "Timberlake, the settlement down in the valley." Caleb's jaw tightened. Timberlake was 40 miles south through terrain that was brutal even in summer. In this storm, with 2 children and a woman already half dead from exposure, impossible. They shouldn't have made it within 10 miles of his cabin. "That's a long walk," he said carefully. "What were you running from?" Jonah's expression shuttered closed. "Nothing. We needed help." It was a lie. A bad one. But Caleb didn't push. Not yet. The boy was on the edge of shattering. Whatever had driven them up this mountain in the middle of winter, it was worse than the storm. "You hungry?" Both children nodded, the first enthusiastic movement they'd made since stumbling through his door. Caleb stood and moved to his stores. He had venison stew left over from his own dinner, kept warm at the fire's edge. He ladled it into 2 wooden bowls and handed them over. The children fell on the food like wolves, burning their mouths in their hurry. "Slow," Caleb warned. "You eat too fast after starving, and you'll just sick it back up." They didn't listen. Within minutes, both bowls were empty. Lily looked up at him with huge eyes that reminded him uncomfortably of a doe he'd once found caught in a trap, terrified but too exhausted to run. "More?" she whispered. It was the first word she'd spoken. Her voice was so small it barely disturbed the air. Caleb's throat tightened in a way he didn't like. He refilled both bowls without comment. By the time they finished their second helpings, exhaustion was pulling at them like a riptide. Lily's head kept drooping toward her brother's shoulder. Jonah fought to keep his eyes open, but it was a losing battle. "Sleep," Caleb said. Both of you. There's furs by the fire. I'll keep watch. What about Ma? Jonah asked, his voice cracking on the word. She's breathing. That's all we can ask for tonight. Tomorrow we'll see what tomorrow brings. Jonah wanted to argue. Caleb could see it in the stubborn set of his jaw, but his body betrayed him. He was too tired, too worn. He pulled Lily close and they curled up on the furs together like puppies, wrapped in blankets that swallowed them whole. Within minutes, they were both asleep. Caleb sat back in his chair and stared at the three people who'd invaded his sanctuary. The woman's breathing had evened out. The children twitched occasionally in their sleep, caught in dreams he hoped were kinder than their reality. Outside, the storm raged on. Snow piled against the windows until the world beyond was nothing but white darkness. The wind howled like something dying. Caleb cleaned and loaded his rifle. Then he pulled out his pistol and checked the action. Then his skinning knife. Old habits. The kind that kept you alive in places where the law was a week's ride away and help was a myth. He'd lived alone for 15 years because alone was simple. Alone didn't ask questions. Alone didn't need protection. Alone didn't remind him of everything he'd lost the day he walked away from the valley and the life he could have had. But now his cabin was full of breathing and heartbeats and the small sounds of people sleeping. Now there were 3 lives depending on him. 3 people who'd stumbled into his nowhere. And somewhere out in the dark, something had scared them badly enough to risk death climbing his mountain. Caleb fed another log into the fire and settled in to wait for dawn. He didn't sleep. He couldn't remember the last time he'd truly slept. The mountain had trained that out of him years ago. Instead, he listened. To the storm. To the settling of logs as the cabin creaked in the cold. To the steady breathing of the woman who'd knocked on his door and changed everything. The night dragged on. Around 3 in the morning, the woman began to mumble in her sleep. Incoherent words at first, fragments of sentences that didn't connect. Then more urgently. No, please, not the children. Take me but leave them, please. Caleb moved to her side and pressed a hand to her forehead. No fever yet. That was good. But her face was twisted in anguish, even in unconsciousness, trapped in whatever nightmare had driven her to his door. Hey, he kept his voice low, gentle. You're safe. You're in a cabin. The children are here. They're safe. The woman's eyes snapped open. They were dark, brown or maybe deep green in better light, and for a moment they were wild with panic. She tried to sit up, gasping. Jonah! Lily! Where? Right there. Caleb pointed to the sleeping children. Safe, fed, sleeping. She stared at them for a long moment, her breathing ragged. Then her whole body seemed to collapse inward, tension releasing all at once. Tears tracked down her cheeks. Thank you. The words were barely audible. Thank you. I didn't know if... I thought we'd die out there. I thought... You nearly did. Caleb stood and moved back to give her space. Another hour in that storm and I'd have found 3 corpses on my porch come morning. She flinched at that. I'm sorry. I didn't know where else to go. We kept walking, and then I saw the light from your window and I thought... She broke off, coughing. Caleb brought her water in a tin cup. She drank it slowly, her hand shaking so badly he had to help her hold it. What's your name? He asked. Evelyn. Evelyn Hale. I'm Caleb Rourke. This is my cabin. Has been for 15 years. She looked around at the sparse interior, taking in the rough walls and simple furnishings. If she found it lacking, she didn't say so. We won't be any trouble, she said quietly. Just let us rest until the storm passes. Then we'll be gone. You came from Timberlake. It wasn't a question. She nodded slowly. That's a hard walk even without children, even without a storm. What were you running from? Evelyn's face went very still. I wasn't running. I was just... We needed to leave. Another lie. Caleb was starting to recognize the tells, the way her eyes wouldn't quite meet his, the careful selection of words. She was protecting something or hiding from it. Mrs. Hale. It's just Evelyn. My husband... She stopped, swallowed hard. I'm a widow. Evelyn, then. I don't know what brought you up my mountain, and maybe that's your business. But if someone's following you, I need to know. I live alone for a reason. I don't want trouble at my door. There's no one following us. She said it too quickly, too firmly. Caleb studied her for a long moment. She was younger than he'd first thought, maybe 30. Pretty, in a worn-down kind of way. The kind of pretty that had been eroded by hard years and worry. Her hands were calloused from work. There was a fading bruise on her left wrist, the yellow-green kind that was a few weeks old. "You're lying," he said quietly, "but you're also exhausted and half frozen. So we'll leave it for now. Get some sleep. We'll talk more when the storm breaks." Relief flooded her face. "Thank you. Truly. I know we're an imposition. You're alive. That's what matters tonight." He moved back to his chair. "I'll keep watch. You need anything, you speak up." Evelyn nodded and lay back down, pulling the blankets tight around herself. But Caleb saw that her eyes stayed open for a long time, staring at the ceiling. Whatever she was afraid of, it didn't stop chasing her just because she'd found shelter. The storm finally broke near dawn. Caleb opened the door to a world transformed. Snow had drifted against the cabin walls in places taller than a man. The trail down the mountain had vanished entirely. The pines sagged under the weight of ice, their branches bent into submission. It would be days before anyone could travel. Maybe a week, which meant whatever Evelyn Hale was running from, it would have to wait. They were trapped here together whether any of them liked it or not. He closed the door and turned back to the cabin. The children were starting to stir. Lily sat up slowly, her hair a wild tangle around her small face. When she saw Caleb, she immediately shrank back against her brother. "It's okay," Jonah murmured to her. "He helped us. Remember?" But Lily's eyes stayed wide and frightened, tracking Caleb's every movement. Caleb understood that kind of fear. He'd seen it before, in animals and people both. The kind of fear that came from being hurt too many times. The kind that expected every hand to be a fist. He moved slowly, deliberately, making himself as unthreatening as a man his size could manage. He stoked the fire and started preparing breakfast. Cornmeal mush with a precious spoonful of honey. Simple food, but hot and filling. "How long has it been since you ate a real meal?" he asked Jonah, keeping his voice conversational. The boy hesitated. 3 days, maybe 4. Before that, another hesitation. "We had potatoes, some dried corn, not much else. Ma said we had to save what we could." "Save it for what?" Jonah's expression shuddered closed again, that protective instinct, that determination not to say too much. Caleb recognized that too. He'd been a boy once who'd learned to guard his words. He didn't push. Instead, he served up the mush in 3 bowls and handed them out. Evelyn had woken by then, sitting up in bed and watching everything with those careful, assessing eyes. "Thank you," she said quietly as he handed her a bowl. "You didn't have to. You're in my house. I'm not going to let you starve." They ate in silence. The only sounds were the scrape of spoons against wood and the snap of the fire. Outside, the world was perfectly still. That particular quiet that only comes after a storm when everything is too exhausted to move. When they finished, Evelyn stood carefully, testing her legs. She swayed once, catching herself against the wall. "Easy," Caleb warned. "You pushed yourself too far. Your body needs time." "I'm fine." But she wasn't. He could see her fighting to stay upright. "At least sit down before you fall down." She wanted to argue. He could see it in the stubborn set of her jaw. But practicality won. She lowered herself into his chair with visible relief. "Your clothes are by the fire," Caleb said, pointing to where he'd draped their things overnight. "They'll still be damp, but they're not frozen anymore. Won't be comfortable, but it's better than nothing." "We really will leave as soon as we can," Evelyn said. "I don't want to impose—" "You keep saying that. But you're not leaving. Not today. Probably not tomorrow either." He moved to the window and gestured at the snow. "Look out there. The trail's gone. Even if you could walk on those legs, which you can't, the children wouldn't make it a mile. You're stuck here until the thaw." Color drained from Evelyn's face. "No, we can't. We have to keep moving." "Why?" "It's not your concern." "It is when you brought it to my door." Caleb crossed his arms. "Look, I don't know what you're running from, and maybe I don't need to know. But if someone's tracking you, If there's danger coming, I deserve a warning. This is my home. I have a right to know what's headed my way. Evelyn looked at her children. Lily had pressed herself against Jonah, her small hands clutching his shirt. Both of them watched the conversation with wide, frightened eyes. Not here, Evelyn said finally. Not in front of them. Caleb nodded slowly. Fair enough, but we're having that conversation. Today. She closed her eyes briefly, and when she opened them again, there was something broken in them. Something defeated. All right, she whispered. But I need you to understand. I never wanted this. Any of this. I just wanted to keep them safe. The way she said it, Caleb knew the story was going to be bad. The kind of bad that explained why a woman would drag 2 children up a frozen mountain with winter breathing down her neck. But before he could press for details, Lily spoke up in that tiny, bird-fragile voice. Mama, are the bad men gone? Evelyn's face crumpled for just a second before she forced it back into something resembling composure. Yes, baby, we're safe now. Another lie. Caleb could hear it in her voice, see it in the way her hands trembled. Whatever the bad men were, they weren't gone. They were just delayed by 40 miles of snow and stone. And when the thaw came, they'd come too. He looked at the 3 people crowded into his cabin. This woman who lied to protect her children, these kids who'd learned fear too young, and felt something shift in his chest, something he'd thought he'd buried 15 years ago when he walked away from everything he'd ever known. Responsibility. That's what it was. The weight of other lives depending on his choices. He'd run from it once, spent a decade and a half building walls between himself and everyone else, turned his back on family, connection, anything that could hurt him again. But somehow, in the space of one night, it had found him anyway. Caleb fed another log into the fire and tried not to think about how badly this was going to end. Because one thing he knew for certain, peace never lasted. Trouble always found you eventually. And this mountain that had protected him for 15 years was about to become a battleground whether he wanted it to or not. The day passed slowly. The storm had exhausted itself, leaving behind brilliant sunshine that made the snow almost painful to look at. Caleb went out twice to check his stores and make sure the animals hadn't gotten into his supplies. He had enough food for one man for months. For 4 people? Maybe 6 weeks if they were careful. Inside, Evelyn tried to be useful despite her exhaustion. She swept the floor, organized his supplies, started mending tears in his clothes that he'd ignored for months. Her hands never stopped moving. Like if she stopped, the fear would catch up with her. The children thawed slowly. Jonah watched everything with those old eyes, learning the cabin's rhythms. Where Caleb kept his weapons, which floorboard creaked. The best place to sit for warmth. Survival instincts. The boy had them in spades. Lily stayed close to her mother, speaking only in whispers. But by late afternoon, Caleb caught her watching him with something other than fear. Curiosity, maybe. Or the beginning of trust. He'd forgotten what it was like having people around. The cabin felt smaller, warmer. The silence he'd cultivated for 15 years was broken by the ordinary sounds of life. Footsteps, conversation, breathing. It made him uncomfortable in ways he couldn't quite name. As evening fell, he made dinner. More venison stew, this time with dried carrots and wild onions from his stores. The children ate like they'd never be full again. Evelyn barely touched her bowl. After Caleb sent the kids outside to play in the snow where they couldn't hear. Then he sat down across from Evelyn at the small table and waited. She stared at her hands for a long time before she spoke. My husband was a good man, she started, when I married him. But things changed. Money got tight. He started drinking, made friends with the wrong people. Caleb said nothing, just listened. He owed money. A lot of it. To men who don't forget debts. Her voice was flat now, empty of emotion. He died 6 months ago. Accident at the lumber mill. Crushed by falling logs. At least that's what they told me. But I think someone wanted to make sure he couldn't pay them back. And the debt transferred to you. She nodded. They came to the house 2 months after Thomas died. Said I had 30 days to come up with $500, or they'd take payment another way. Her hands clenched into fists on the table. They looked at Lily when they said it. Made sure I understood what they meant. Rage kindled in Caleb's chest. $500. A fortune for a widow with no skills and two mouths to feed. And the implication, so you ran. I sold everything. The house, the furniture, Thomas's tools, everything. Got maybe $80 for all of it. Then I took the children and left in the middle of the night. She finally looked up at him. I didn't know where to go. I just knew we had to get away. We walked for weeks, town to town, living on scraps, sleeping in barns when we could. But everywhere we went, I felt like they were following, like they had eyes everywhere. How'd you end up here? Timberlake was supposed to be far enough, remote enough. I found work cleaning at the boarding house. We had a room. It wasn't much, but it was something. She paused. Then 3 days ago I saw one of them, in the street. I'm sure it was him. The man who came to my house, who looked at my daughter like she was... Her voice broke. She pressed her hands to her face. Caleb waited until she'd collected herself. So you ran again, up the mountain. I didn't have a choice. If they found us, if they took her... She couldn't finish the sentence. I saw your cabin, the smoke from the chimney. It was like a miracle. I thought maybe this man will help us. Maybe we'll be safe just for a little while. You should have told me all this last night. Would you have let us stay if you'd known? Honest question, deserved an honest answer. I don't know, Caleb admitted. Maybe not. Trouble's the last thing I wanted to find on this mountain. I understand. When the snow clears, we'll leave. I'll figure something out. I always do. But Caleb was already shaking his head. You'll be dead before you make it 5 miles, he said bluntly. You, the children, all 3 of you. Either the cold will get you or those men will. You're exhausted. They're kids. You've got no weapons, no supplies, no plan. Then what am I supposed to do? There was desperation in her voice now. I can't stay here. I won't bring that danger to your door. You've been kind enough already. Caleb was quiet for a long moment, thinking through options that all ended badly. Finally, he said, How many men? What? The ones looking for you. How many? Evelyn blinked, confused by the question. I don't... Maybe 4, 5? I only saw 2 at my house, but I heard there were more. Armed? Yes. At least the ones I saw were. Dangerous? They're debt collectors. What do you think? Caleb nodded slowly, calculations running through his head. 5 men, maybe 6. Armed, but probably not professional. Men used to intimidating widows and shopkeepers, not fighting someone who'd fight back. When did you say you saw one of them in Timberlake? 3 days ago. In this storm, they won't have been able to follow. No one's that good. But when it clears, if they're determined, they might ask questions. Find out which way you went. Then we really do need to leave. No. Caleb's voice was firm. Running won't solve this. You'll just keep running until you run out of places to go, and eventually they'll catch you. So what? We just wait for them to find us? Maybe, Caleb said. But this time you won't be alone. And this mountain, this cabin, I know every inch of it, every trail, every rock, every place where a man could hide or get ambushed. If they come, they'll be on my territory. That changes things. Understanding dawned in Evelyn's eyes. You're saying you'll fight them. I'm saying I'll protect what's mine. And right now, you 3 are in my cabin. That makes you mine to protect. Why? Her voice was barely a whisper. Why would you do that? You don't know us. We're nothing to you. Caleb didn't have a good answer to that. Maybe it was because he'd seen that look in Jonah's eyes, the acceptance of death. Maybe it was because he'd heard Lily ask if the bad men were gone. Maybe it was because 15 years of running from everything had finally caught up with him. Or maybe it was simpler than that. Because nobody knocks on my door, he said quietly. And when someone finally does, I'm not going to send them back out to die. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. Thank you. I don't know how to... Don't thank me yet. We don't know if they're coming. Might be they'll give up. Might be the snow will keep them away. But if they do come... He met her eyes. It's going to get ugly. You understand? This won't be clean or easy. I'll do what needs doing, but you and the children will need to stay out of the way. She nodded slowly. We will. I promise. We'll do whatever you say. Good. Caleb stood. Then for now, we wait. We prepare. And we hope the mountain does what it's always done. Keep the world out. Outside, Jonah and Lily were building something in the snow. Their laughter drifted through the walls, tentative at first, then growing stronger. The sound of children who'd forgotten, for just a moment, how to be afraid. Caleb watched them through the window. In the golden light of late afternoon, with snow sparkling all around them, they looked almost normal, almost safe. But he knew better. Safety was an illusion. Peace was temporary. And somewhere down in the valley, bad men were waiting for the snow to melt so they could climb his mountain. Let them come, Caleb thought. This is my mountain. These are my walls. And some things were worth fighting for, even if you'd spent 15 years convinced otherwise. The days that followed settled into a rhythm that surprised Caleb with its ease. He'd expected chaos, friction, the constant abrasion of lives rubbing against each other in too small a space. Instead, the cabin began to transform in ways both visible and invisible, like snow melting to reveal the ground underneath. Evelyn moved through the space with the efficiency of someone who'd learned to make herself useful wherever she landed. On the third morning, Caleb woke to find his floors swept clean for the first time in months. The dust and pine needles that had accumulated through winter banished to some unknown place. His dishes, which he'd been washing maybe once a week, now sat clean and stacked by the basin. The pile of mending he'd been ignoring had somehow shrunk by half. "You don't have to do that," he said, watching her work thread through a tear in his spare shirt. "I know." She didn't look up. "But idle hands make me nervous. And you're feeding us, sheltering us, protecting us. The least I can do is make myself useful." There was something in her voice that made Caleb not push further. She needed this, he realized. Needed to feel like she was contributing, earning her place. Pride, maybe. Or just the survival instinct of someone who'd learned that nothing in life was truly free. The children adapted faster than he'd expected. Jonah was cautious, watchful, but curious too. He followed Caleb outside when Caleb went to check the perimeter, stepping exactly where Caleb stepped, learning the paths around the cabin. The boy asked questions, smart ones. "Why'd you build here?" Jonah asked on the fourth day, his breath puffing white in the cold air. "Defensible position," Caleb answered. "See how the valley narrows? Only one way in or out. Anyone comes up that trail, I can see them a mile off." "What about the ridges? Someone could come over the top." Caleb glanced at the boy with new respect. "They could try. It's a hard climb, and there's loose shale up there that'll start an avalanche if you don't know the safe routes." "I know them. Most people don't." "Will you teach me?" The question caught Caleb off guard. Why would you need to know? Jonah's jaw set in that stubborn way it did when he was trying not to show fear. In case something happens. In case I need to help protect Ma and Lily. He was 10 years old. He should have been thinking about fishing and games and whatever else 10-year-old boys thought about. Instead, he was already planning for violence, already accepting that protection might fall to him. "Yeah," Caleb said quietly. "I'll teach you." Lily was harder to reach. She spoke in whispers when she spoke at all, and she never strayed more than a few feet from her mother. But Caleb caught her watching him sometimes when she thought he wasn't looking, studying him the way a bird studies a cat, trying to determine if he was a threat. On the fifth evening, as they sat around the fire after dinner, Lily finally spoke directly to him. "Do you live alone?" Her voice was so small he almost missed it. "I do," Caleb said. "Have for a long time." "Don't you get lonely?" It was such a simple question, asked with such innocent directness, that it punched through Caleb's defenses before he could stop it. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but lonely's better than some alternatives." "Like what?" "Lily, don't pester," Evelyn said gently. "It's all right." Caleb stirred the fire with a stick, watching the embers spiral upward. "Like getting hurt or losing people. When you're alone, those things can't happen." Lily considered this with the seriousness only children can muster. "But don't you want friends?" "Friends are complicated." "Ma says friends make life better. Your ma's probably right." Lily nodded, satisfied with this answer, and returned her attention to the small doll she'd fashioned from scraps of fabric. The conversation was over for her, but it left Caleb unsettled in a way he couldn't quite name. The weather held cold but clear. Each morning, Caleb would venture out to check his trap lines, or what remained of them under the snow. He caught a rabbit on the 7th day, a lynx on the 9th. Small victories, but they stretched his supplies and showed the children how to survive on the mountain. Jonah paid close attention to everything: how to skin an animal without damaging the pelt, how to read tracks in the snow, how to find north when the sun was hidden. The boy soaked up knowledge like parched earth drinking rain. "My pa used to hunt," Jonah said one afternoon as they worked together to prepare the lynx pelt. "Before he started drinking, he took me once when I was little. I don't remember much about it." "Your pa taught you to track it all?" "Some. How to move quiet, how to watch the wind." Jonah's hand stilled on the pelt. "He was good at things like that, before everything went bad." Caleb knew that story. He'd heard variations of it 100 times. Good men brought low by bad choices, families torn apart by debts and drink and desperation. The frontier was littered with such casualties. "He teach you to shoot?" "A little. We had an old rifle. Ma sold it after he died." "Can you hit what you aim at?" Jonah's face flushed. "Sometimes. Not always." "We'll fix that." Caleb stood and moved to his gun rack. He selected his smallest rifle, a single-shot .22 he used for small game. "This here's got almost no kick. Light enough for you to handle. We'll start with targets. Work up to moving game." The boy's eyes went wide. "You're going to teach me to shoot?" "You're 10. That's old enough to learn. And if trouble comes—" Caleb didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. They both knew what he meant. They spent the next hour in the clearing behind the cabin, setting up targets made from bark, and having Jonah practice his stance, his breathing, his trigger pull. The boy was a natural, steady hands, good eyes, and the patience to wait for the right moment. By the end of the session, he was hitting the targets more often than not. "Don't tell your ma I gave you a gun," Caleb said as they packed up. "Why not?" "Because mothers worry, and she's got enough on her mind without adding this to it." Jonah nodded seriously, understanding the weight of the secret. "Thank you, Mr. Rourke, for teaching me." "Just Caleb, and you're welcome." Inside, Evelyn had transformed the cabin again. She'd found his store of herbs, wild mint and sage he'd gathered last summer, and made tea that actually tasted like something other than boiled pine needles. She'd reorganized his supplies so things made sense, grouped by use instead of just shoved on shelves wherever they fit. She'd even hung a cloth curtain to separate his bed from the rest of the space, giving everyone a semblance of privacy. "You've been busy," Caleb observed. "Old habits." She poured tea into cups. Actual cups, not the tin mugs he usually used. "I kept a house for 12 years. Hard to turn that off." "You do a good job of it." She glanced at him, surprised. "Thank you. That's kind of you to say." It was a small thing, that compliment. But something in her face softened, some tight knot of worry loosening just a fraction. How long had it been, Caleb wondered, since someone had simply acknowledged her efforts without criticism or expectation? They fell into evening routine. Dinner. Evelyn had learned to make his venison stretch further by mixing in more beans and wild onions. Stories by the fire. Jonah loved hearing about Caleb's encounters with bears and mountain lions, though Caleb carefully edited out the parts that involved significant bloodshed. Lily would curl up against her mother, listening with wide eyes but saying nothing. Then, as the fire burned low, everyone would settle in for sleep. The children on their bed of furs by the hearth, Evelyn in Caleb's rope bed, Caleb himself in his chair, rifle across his lap, keeping watch. He told himself he was just being cautious, that anyone could come up that trail, bandits, drifters, wild animals. But the truth was darker. He was waiting for the men Evelyn had described, the debt collectors who'd looked at a 6-year-old girl and seen payment, the kind of men who wouldn't let $500 walk away just because of a little snow. On the 11th night, his vigilance was rewarded. Caleb jerked awake, not from sleep exactly, since he never fully slept anymore, but from that half-dozing state he'd perfected over the years. Something had changed. Some quality of the silence had shifted. He rose silently and moved to the window, careful not to disturb the others. Outside, the moon was nearly full, painting the snow in shades of silver and shadow. Nothing moved. The trees stood still. But something felt wrong. Then he saw it. A glint of something that didn't belong, metal catching moonlight. There and gone. Someone was out there. Caleb's blood turned cold. He crossed to Evelyn's bed and put a hand over her mouth, pressing gently. Her eyes flew open, panic immediate. Quiet, he breathed, so low it was almost just exhaled air. Someone's outside. Wake the children. No noise. Get them behind the bed. He felt her nod beneath his palm. He released her and moved back to the window, rifle in hand now. His mind raced through possibilities. Could be a hunter lost in the dark. Could be a trapper checking unfamiliar territory. Could be... The thought died as he saw movement. Not one person. 2. No. 3. Moving through the trees with the careful precision of men who knew they were approaching something dangerous. They weren't lost. Behind him, Evelyn had roused the children with urgent whispers. To their credit, they moved silently, fear giving them the discipline to obey without question. Within seconds, all 3 were pressed behind the bed, hidden from the door and windows. Caleb watched the figures approach. They were still 100 yards out, moving slowly, checking, looking for signs of life probably, trying to determine if the cabin was occupied. One of them raised a hand, the other stopped. Caleb's finger found the trigger of his rifle. Through the window, he watched the men confer in silence. Then they spread out, one staying central, 2 flanking to the sides. Professional tactics. These weren't simple thugs or drunk debt collectors. Someone had taught them how to approach a fortified position. That changed things. The central figure, the leader, presumably, moved forward alone. He got within 50 yards of the cabin before calling out, "Hello, the house." His voice was rough, carrying easily in the still night air. "Anyone home?" Caleb said nothing, just watched. "We're looking for someone," the man continued. "A woman, 2 children. They might have passed this way. We just want to ask some questions." Still, Caleb waited. Let them show their hand. "We're willing to pay for information," the man said. "Good money. $20 to anyone who's seen them." $20. That was real money. Enough to make most people talk. But it was also proof. These men weren't casual searchers. They were invested, determined, and they were lying. Caleb could hear it in the careful way the man chose his words. They didn't want to ask questions. They wanted Evelyn and the children, and they were willing to pay $20 for the privilege of getting close enough to take them. "Please," the man called. "We mean no harm. We just want to find them, make sure they're safe." A lie wrapped in another lie. Caleb had heard enough. He cracked the door open 2 inches, enough to let his voice carry, but not enough to make himself a target. "You're on private property," Caleb called back. "You've got 10 seconds to turn around and head back the way you came." Silence. Then the man's voice came back, harder now. "We don't want trouble, friend. Just looking for family. The woman's husband owed us money. We just want what's ours." "Not my concern." "You sure about that? We're reasonable men. If they're in there, just let us talk to them. Work something out. No one needs to get hurt." Caleb chambered around. The metallic click echoed in the night. 5 seconds, he said. More silence. Then one of the flanking men started to move, trying to edge closer to the cabin wall where he'd be harder to see. Caleb fired. The bullet kicked up snow 2 feet in front of the man, close enough that the muzzle flash probably temporarily blinded him. The man dove backward, cursing. "Next one's not a warning," Caleb shouted. "Saisi." Caleb shouted, "Get off my mountain, now." For a long moment, nobody moved. The 3 men were frozen, clearly reassessing. They'd expected an easy target, maybe an old hermit who'd cave under pressure. They hadn't expected someone willing to shoot first and ask questions, never. "This isn't over," the leader called. "You're making a mistake, friend. Only mistake is you still standing there." Another long pause. Then the leader made a sharp gesture, and all 3 men began backing away, disappearing into the tree line. But Caleb noticed they didn't retreat far, just out of rifle range. Watching. Waiting. He closed the door and threw the bolt, then moved to the back window. Sure enough, He could see shadows moving in the trees. They were circling, looking for another angle of approach, or maybe just trying to get a better view inside the cabin. Are they gone? Evelyn's voice was tight with terror. No, they pulled back, but they're still out there. Caleb checked his other rifle, making sure it was loaded. How many men did you say came to your house? 2, but I heard there might be more. There's 3 outside, which means there could be more we haven't seen yet. He moved back to the front window. They know you're here. They're not going to just walk away. What do we do? Caleb was quiet for a moment, thinking. The men outside weren't amateurs. They'd approached carefully, used tactics, pulled back when met with force instead of rushing in like idiots. That meant they'd be back with a plan. We wait, he said finally. They won't try anything in the dark. Too many unknowns. They don't know how many of us are in here, what weapons we have, whether there's back doors or escape routes. They'll watch tonight, maybe try to get closer for a better look, but they won't attack until dawn. How do you know? Because that's what I'd do. He glanced at her. Get some rest while you can. Morning's going to come hard. I can't sleep. Not with them out there. Then rest. Close your eyes. Breathe. You'll need your strength. He settled back into his chair, rifle across his lap. I'll keep watch. Evelyn looked like she wanted to argue, but exhaustion and fear had drained her. She pulled the children closer and lay down, though Caleb could see her eyes stay open, staring at the ceiling. The night crawled past. Caleb watched the shadows, tracking the men's movements. They were patient. He'd give them that. They took turns, 2 watching while 1 rested. Professional, organized, dangerous. As gray dawn began to seep into the eastern sky, the men made their move. All 3 approached together this time, walking openly down the trail. They stopped 30 yards out, just at the edge of effective rifle range. The leader, a big man with a dark beard, raised his hands in a gesture of peace. We can do this easy or hard, he called out. Your choice, friend. Caleb opened the door wide enough to show himself, rifle prominent. Already told you to leave. And I'm telling you that's not an option. The man's voice was calm, reasonable. The woman in there owes us $500. Her dead husband's debt became hers. That's how this works. That's not how anything works. Maybe not in your world, but in ours, debts get paid, one way or another. The man's eyes were hard despite his easy tone. Now, we can settle this peaceful. You hand over the woman and kids, we'll even throw in $20 for your trouble. Or we can do it the other way. And friend, you don't want the other way. $20 to sell out a widow and her children, Caleb said. That's what you think I'm worth? Every man's got a price. Not this man. The bearded man sighed like this was all very tedious. Look around, friend. You're 1 person. We're 3. And we've got 4 more men coming up the trail right now. By noon, there'll be 7 of us. You going to hold off 7 men by yourself? Guess we'll find out. You're making a mistake, a fatal one. Won't be my first. Caleb raised the rifle slightly. Now I'm going to tell you one more time. Get off my mountain. I won't ask again. For just a second, something dangerous flashed in the bearded man's eyes. Then he smiled, and somehow that was worse than the threat. All right, friend, we'll go, but we'll be back, and when we come back, we're not going to be so polite. He turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and that woman you're protecting? Ask her what her husband did to earn that debt. Ask her about the company money he stole, the families he hurt. Then decide if she's worth dying for. With that, all 3 men walked back down the trail, disappearing into the trees. Caleb waited a full minute before closing the door. When he turned around, Evelyn was standing there, her face ashen. Is it true? Caleb asked. Did your husband steal from them? I don't know. Her voice was barely audible. Thomas said he was managing accounts for a lumber company, that they accused him falsely when money went missing. He swore he was innocent. But you don't believe that. She closed her eyes. I don't know what to believe anymore. All I know is he's dead and they're hunting my children. That's all that matters. Caleb studied her for a long moment. Maybe her husband had been a thief. Maybe he'd hurt people. Maybe this debt was legitimate in some twisted frontier way. But none of that changed the essential truth. Evelyn and her children were in his cabin, under his protection, and a group of armed men wanted to take them. Everything else was just noise. Doesn't matter what he did, Caleb said finally. Sins of the father don't transfer to the children. They want you. They're going to have to come through me. Relief and something else, gratitude maybe, or disbelief that anyone would stand for her, flooded Evelyn's face.
Why? Why would you fight for us? You could just let them take us. This isn't your fight. It became my fight when they showed up at my door. Caleb moved to his stores and started pulling out extra ammunition. Now help me prepare. They'll be back, probably with those 4 additional men. 7 against 1 isn't great odds, but this cabin's solid and I know this mountain. We've got advantages if we use them right. Jonah emerged from behind the bed. I can help. I can shoot now. No. But you said, I said I'd teach you and I have. But you're not fighting grown men. Not yet. Caleb softened his tone slightly. I need you to protect your mother and sister. If something happens to me, if they get inside, you get them out the back window and run for the high ridge. There's a cave up there, hard to find if you don't know where to look. You hide there until they're gone. Understand? The boy wanted to argue. Caleb could see it in the stubborn set of his jaw, the way his hands clenched. But he finally nodded. I understand. Good. Now, help me move this table. We're going to barricade the door better. They spent the next hour fortifying the cabin. Caleb moved his heavy table against the door, then stacked firewood behind it for added weight. He checked every window, making sure the shutters were solid. He showed Evelyn and Jonah how to reload rifles quickly, had them practice until they could do it by touch in the dark. Lily watched everything with those huge, frightened eyes. At one point, she tugged on Caleb's sleeve. Are the bad men going to hurt us? She whispered. Caleb knelt down so he was at her level. Not if I have anything to say about it. You trust me? She studied his face with that intense way children have of looking through pretense to truth. Then, slowly, she nodded. Good. Then you stick close to your mama and do exactly what she says. Can you do that? Another nod. Brave girl. He touched her head gently, just once, then stood. All right. Everyone eat something, drink water. We don't know when we'll get another chance. They ate in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Caleb found himself watching them. This makeshift family that had stumbled into his life. Evelyn with her tired eyes and calloused hands. Jonah trying so hard to be brave. Lily clutching her makeshift doll like it was the only stable thing in a world gone mad. 12 days ago, he'd been alone, content in his isolation, convinced that solitude was safety. Now here he was, preparing for a gunfight to protect 3 people he barely knew. The old Caleb, the one who'd walked away from everything 15 years ago, would have told them to leave at first light, would have sent them back down the mountain to face their fate alone. Self-preservation above all else. But something had changed. Maybe it was the sound of children's laughter in his cabin. Maybe it was the way Evelyn had restored order to his chaos. Maybe it was simply that he was tired of running from everything that mattered. Or maybe he'd just been alone too long, and some part of him had been waiting for someone to knock on his door and give him a reason to fight again. Mr. Rourke? Evelyn's voice broke his thoughts. Caleb, he corrected automatically. Caleb. She paused, searching for words. Whatever happens today, thank you for giving us a chance, for not turning us away. That means more than you know. Save your thanks for when we're all still breathing tomorrow. She smiled just a little. All right, but I'm keeping it ready, just in case. The sun climbed higher, the shadows shortened, and somewhere down the mountain 7 men were making their plans. Caleb checked his rifles one more time, counted his ammunition, said a silent prayer to whatever forces governed survival on this mountain. Then he settled in to wait. The storm was coming, but this time it wouldn't be snow and wind. This time it would be blood and gunfire. And when it was over, this mountain would remember what happened here, one way or another. They came at noon, just as the sun reached its peak and shadows disappeared into pools of light across the snow. Caleb saw them first, 7 dark shapes moving up the trail in a loose formation that spoke of experience. They weren't rushing, weren't trying to hide. They walked with the confidence of men who believed numbers made them invincible. They're here, Caleb said quietly.
Evelyn gathered the children immediately, pulling them behind the bed where Caleb had stacked extra furs and blankets to create a makeshift barrier. Lily was crying silently, tears streaming down her face. Jonah's jaw was set hard, his small hands clenched into fists. Evelyn held them both, her own fear visible in every line of her body, but her voice steady as she whispered reassurances. Caleb positioned himself at the front window where he had the best view of the approach. His Sharps rifle rested on the windowsill, already loaded. His revolver sat on the table within easy reach. Extra ammunition lined the sill in neat rows. Everything organized, everything ready. The 7 men stopped about 60 yards out, well within rifle range, but far enough that they could scatter if shooting started. The bearded leader, the one who'd spoken that morning, stood at the front. Next to him was a wiry man with a scar running down his left cheek. The others fanned out on either side, creating a semicircle that would make it harder for Caleb to cover all of them at once. Smart. Dangerous. "Last chance," the bearded man called out. His voice carried easily in the still mountain air. "Send them out and you walk away. Keep protecting them and you die today. Simple as that." Caleb didn't respond, just watched. "Come on, friend. Be reasonable. You don't even know these people. Why die for strangers?" "Why kill for money?" Caleb called back. The bearded man laughed. "Fair point. But that's the world, isn't it? Some of us take what we're owed.
Others stand in the way and get buried. Which one are you going to be? The one still standing when you leave. That's a lot of confidence for 1 man against 7. Confidence is easy when you've got home advantage." The scarred man leaned in and said something to the leader. The bearded man nodded, then called out again. "My associate here, his name's Pike. He says maybe you don't understand how this is going to go. So let me explain it real clear. We're going to give you 1 minute to think it over. If the woman and kids aren't out here by then, we're coming in. And when we come in, we're not going to be gentle. Anyone in that cabin who isn't our property is going to catch a bullet. Your choice." Caleb's finger found the trigger. He calculated distances, wind drift, the fact that he'd need to work the bolt between shots. 7 targets. Maybe he could drop 3 before they scattered. Maybe 4 if he was lucky. That still left 3 or 4 men to rush the cabin while he was reloading. Not great odds, but he'd faced worse. 30 seconds, the bearded man called. Behind him, Caleb heard Evelyn's sharp intake of breath, heard Lily's muffled sob, heard Jonah whisper something fierce and protective to his sister. 15 seconds. Caleb sighted down the barrel at the bearded man's chest. Center mass. The way you were supposed to shoot when killing mattered more than wounding. "Time's up, friend. We're coming in." The bearded man raised his hand to signal the advance. Then a voice rang out from the trees to the right, sharp and commanding. "That's far enough, Garrett." Every head turned. From the tree line emerged a man Caleb had never seen before. Tall, gray-haired, wearing a long coat that had seen better days. He was alone, but he carried himself with the kind of authority that made the 7 armed men hesitate. The bearded man, Garrett, lowered his hand slowly. "Mr. Blackwood, didn't expect to see you up here." Clearly. The older man walked forward until he stood between the 7 men in the cabin, positioned precisely in the line of fire. "What exactly are you boys doing?" "Collecting a debt, sir, like you hired us to do." "I hired you to find the woman and bring her in for questioning. I didn't authorize an assault on a civilian's home." Garrett's face tightened. "With respect, sir, the man in that cabin is harboring our property. He was given multiple chances to hand them over peacefully." "Your property." Blackwood's voice went cold. "Is that how you talk about a widow and 2 children? That widow's husband stole from your company. $10,000, not the $500 we told her about. We figured if we went easy, she'd pay what she could without running, but she ran anyway, which means she knew the real number, which means she's complicit." Caleb's mind raced. $10,000. That was serious money, the kind of money men killed for without hesitation. And if Evelyn had known about it, had maybe even helped hide it. But no, that didn't matter. Whatever her husband had done, whatever she'd known or not known, it didn't change the fundamental equation. She and her children were behind him, and these men wanted to take them. Everything else was noise. "Even if she knew," Blackwood said, "that doesn't give you the right to terrorize children.
or to threaten a man defending his home. So what do you want us to do? Pike, the scarred man, spoke up. Just let them go? $10,000 doesn't walk away. I want you to stand down, return to town. I'll handle this personally. You're going to let her go, Garrett said flatly. What I'm going to do is none of your concern. You work for me. I'm giving you an order. Follow it. For a long moment, nobody moved. The tension stretched tight as a wire, ready to snap. Caleb kept his rifle trained on Garrett, ready to fire at the first wrong move. Finally, Garrett lowered his weapon. Yes, sir. But if that money doesn't come back, if this doesn't get resolved, then you can complain to me in town, where civilized people handle their disputes. Not here. Not like this. Blackwood's voice was iron. Go. One by one, the 7 men turned and started back down the trail. Garrett was the last to leave, throwing one final look at the cabin that promised this wasn't over. Then he too disappeared into the trees. Blackwood stood there alone for a moment, then turned toward the cabin. You in there? The one with the rifle. I need to speak with you. Caleb didn't move. Speak from there. What I have to say shouldn't be shouted for the whole mountain to hear. Say it anyway. Blackwood sighed. Fine. My name is Marcus Blackwood. I own the Cascade Lumber Company. Thomas Hale, the woman's late husband, was my accountant. 6 months ago, I discovered significant discrepancies in our books. $10,000 missing. Thomas died before I could confront him about it. So you sent men after his widow. I sent men to ask questions, to determine what she knew. I didn't authorize threats or violence. Blackwood's voice was weary. I'm a businessman, not a thug. But I'm also not a fool. That money was real. It's gone. And someone has to account for it. She doesn't have it. How do you know? Because she showed up at my door half frozen with 2 starving children. You think she'd be living like that if she had $10,000 hidden away? Blackwood was quiet for a moment. That's a fair point, but maybe she hid it. Maybe she planned to come back for it once things settled. Or maybe her husband stole it without her knowledge and died before he could tell her where he put it. Also possible. Blackwood moved a few steps closer. Look, I'm not unsympathetic to her situation, but I've got investors, partners, people who expect me to account for that money. I can't just write it off because her circumstances are tragic. What do you want? To talk to her, face to face, hear her story. Maybe we can work something out. Caleb glanced back at Evelyn. She was pale as snow, trembling, but she nodded slowly. She'll talk to you, Caleb said. But you come alone, unarmed. Any tricks, and you don't walk back down this mountain. Understood? Understood. Caleb watched as Blackwood unbuckled his gun belt and laid it on the ground. Then he walked forward, hands visible, until he stood just outside the cabin door. Caleb opened it with his rifle raised. Inside. Slow. Blackwood stepped in carefully. His eyes adjusted to the dimmer interior, taking in the fortified windows, the ammunition, the family huddled behind the bed. When he saw the children, something in his face softened. Mrs. Hale, he said gently, I apologize for the terror my men caused. That was not my intention. Evelyn stood slowly, putting herself between Blackwood and the children. You're the man who sent them after us. I sent them to find you, to ask questions. What they did beyond that, the threats, the violence, I didn't authorize it, and I'm genuinely sorry. Sorry doesn't erase the last 2 months. Sorry doesn't give me back the nights I've spent terrified they'd find us, that they'd take my children. No, it doesn't. Blackwood pulled off his hat. But maybe we can find a way forward. Tell me the truth, Mrs. Hale. Did you know your husband stole from me? Evelyn's hands clenched at her sides. I knew something was wrong. He'd come home with money sometimes, more than his salary should have been. He said he was doing side work, bookkeeping for other companies. I wanted to believe him. But you didn't. No. Her voice broke. But what was I supposed to do? He was my husband, the father of my children. Was I supposed to turn him in? Destroy our family? So you knew, at least suspected. Suspecting isn't the same as knowing. And even if I'd known for certain, I didn't know where the money was. Thomas kept his business separate. I ran the house. He ran everything else. Blackwood studied her face. I believe you, but that doesn't solve my problem. I've got investors breathing down my neck. Men who don't care about your circumstances, they just want their money back. I don't have it. I sold everything we owned and got $80. That's all there is. What about property? Anything Thomas might have owned that could be liquidated? We had nothing. The house was rented. We had no land, no investments. Thomas lived for today, never planned for tomorrow. Evelyn's voice was bitter. Whatever he did with that money, he didn't spend it on us. Caleb had been listening quietly, but now he spoke up. Could he have gambled it away? Blackwood turned. What? The woman said her husband started drinking. Drunks gamble. $10,000 could disappear real fast in the wrong card games. Thomas didn't gamble, Evelyn said, but there was uncertainty in her voice. You sure? How much time did he spend away from home those last months? She opened her mouth, closed it. A lot. He said he was working late, meeting with clients. Or he was at a card table losing money as fast as he stole it. Caleb looked at Blackwood. It's a theory, better than thinking this woman has $10,000 hidden under a floorboard somewhere. Blackwood rubbed his face tiredly. Even if that's true, it doesn't help me. The money's still gone. I still have to answer for it. That's your problem, not hers. She didn't steal from you. She didn't ask her husband to steal. And she sure as hell doesn't deserve to be hunted like an animal because of his mistakes. I agree. Which is why I came up here to call off my men. Blackwood turned back to Evelyn. Mrs. Hale, I'm prepared to make you an offer. Not because I'm a charitable man. I'm not. But because I've got 2 daughters of my own, and seeing yours huddled behind that bed reminds me that some debts aren't worth collecting. What kind of offer? I'll forgive the debt. All of it. The $10,000 your husband stole and the interest that's accrued. In exchange, you sign a statement confirming what you've told me today. That you didn't know about the theft, that you don't know where the money went, and that you've made full restitution to the best of your ability. Evelyn stared at him. Why would you do that? Because I'm tired. Because hunting you down won't bring back my money. And because if I don't end this now, those men will. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. And I won't have children's blood on my conscience. Blackwood pulled a folded paper from his coat. I had my lawyer draw this up, just in case. Sign it, and you're free. Evelyn took the paper with shaking hands, read it slowly. This says I forfeit all claim to any property, assets, or benefits from my husband's employment. Standard language. Protects me in case he did hide money somewhere and it's found later. There is no money. There's nothing. Then you've got nothing to lose by signing. She looked at Caleb. He could see the question in her eyes. Is this real? Can I trust him? Caleb studied Blackwood. The man looked sincere, tired, like he genuinely wanted this to be over. But Caleb had learned long ago that looking sincere and being sincere were different things. Let me see it, he said. Blackwood handed over the document. Caleb read it carefully, looking for traps. The language was straightforward. Evelyn acknowledged her husband's theft, claimed no knowledge of the money's location, agreed to forfeit all claims to his property and earnings, and in exchange the debt would be marked as satisfied in full. It's legal, Caleb said finally. If she signs this, you can't come after her again. That's the idea. What about your men? Garrett and Pike and the others? They going to honor this? They work for me. They'll do what I tell them. Blackwood's voice was firm. And if they don't, they'll answer to me personally. Evelyn took the paper back. Where do I sign? Blackwood produced a pen. Bottom of the page, and I'll need a witness signature as well. Evelyn signed with a hand that shook so badly she nearly couldn't write her name. Then she handed the pen to Caleb. He signed as witness, his own handwriting rough from years of disuse. Blackwood took the document, folded it carefully, and tucked it back in his coat. It's done. You're free, Mrs. Hale. The debt is satisfied. Evelyn's legs gave out. She sat down hard on the floor, her breath coming in gasps. The children rushed to her, wrapping their arms around her. All 3 of them were crying. Blackwood watched for a moment, then turned to leave. At the door, he paused and looked back at Caleb. You're a good man, he said quietly. Not many would stand against 7 armed men for strangers. They're not strangers anymore. No, I suppose they're not. Blackwood put his hat back on. For what it's worth, I knew your father. Caleb went very still. What? Jonathan Rourke. We did business together back in '63. Good man, honest. I was sorry to hear about what happened. How do you know who I am? The name. The fact that you're living alone on this mountain. I heard stories about Jonathan's son, the one who walked away from everything after the accident. Blackwood's eyes were kind. I don't know what drove you up here, and I won't pretend to, but it looks like life found you anyway. Caleb's throat was tight. You going to tell anyone I'm here? Who would I tell? Far as the world knows, Caleb Rourke disappeared 15 years ago. Some men deserve to stay disappeared. He opened the door. Take care of them. They've had a hard road. Then he was gone, walking back down the trail toward his gun belt and the long journey back to civilization. Caleb closed the door and threw the bolt. For a long moment, he just stood there, his back against the wood, trying to process everything that had just happened. Behind him, Evelyn was still crying, but they were different tears now. Relief, release, the kind of crying that comes when something that's been crushing you for months suddenly lifts. Is it over? Jonah asked, his voice small. Is it really over? Caleb turned to face them. The boy was holding his mother and sister, trying to be strong, even though his own cheeks were wet. Lily had her face buried against Evelyn's shoulder. All three of them looked wrung out, exhausted, like they'd been holding their breath for so long they'd forgotten how to breathe normally. Yeah, Caleb said softly. It's over. They're gone. They won't come back? No. The man who hired them called them off. The debt's forgiven. There's no reason for anyone to chase you anymore. Evelyn looked up at him, her face blotchy and tear-streaked. Thank you. I know I keep saying it, but thank you. You didn't have to do any of this. You could have turned us away that first night. You could have told Blackwood's men where we were. You could have... I could have done a lot of things, Caleb interrupted gently. But I didn't. And you're here. And you're safe. That's all that matters. Why? The question came from Jonah. Why did you help us? It was a fair question, one Caleb had been asking himself since the moment he'd opened his door to three half-frozen strangers. He'd spent 15 years avoiding exactly this: involvement, connection, the terrible vulnerability that came from caring about other people. But looking at them now, this makeshift family that had stumbled into his life, he couldn't regret it. Because you knocked on my door, he said simply. And I opened it. And once you do that, once you let someone in, you don't just shut them back out into the cold. It wasn't a complete answer. Maybe there wasn't a complete answer. But it was true enough. Evelyn stood slowly, steadying herself against the bed. We should go. Now that it's over, now that it's safe, we should leave before we impose any further. Where would you go? I don't know. Back to Timberlake, maybe? Or somewhere else? Somewhere we can start over. With $80 and no plan? We've survived on less. Survived isn't living. Caleb moved to the fire and stirred it back to life. Stay, at least through the rest of winter. By spring, you'll have had time to rest, to plan properly. The children will be stronger. You'll be stronger. Caleb, we can't just... Why not? I've got the space, I've got the supplies, and apparently I've gotten used to having people around. He said it lightly, but there was truth underneath. The cabin felt different now. Warmer. More alive. Besides, Jonah's only halfway through his shooting lessons. Seems a waste to stop now. The boy's face lit up. Really? You'll keep teaching me? If your ma says it's all right. All eyes turned to Evelyn. She looked torn, pride warring with practicality, independence fighting exhaustion. Finally, she nodded slowly. Through the winter, she said, but we pay our way. I'll cook, clean, mend, whatever needs doing. We're not charity cases. Never thought you were. And when spring comes, we leave. Find our own place, our own life. If that's what you want. Evelyn searched his face, looking for something. What she found there seemed to satisfy her because some of the tension left her shoulders. All right then, through the winter. The rest of that day passed in a strange sort of peace, The danger had passed so suddenly that it left everyone a bit untethered, like sailors who'd been bracing against a storm only to have it break around them without warning. Caleb went about his normal routines, checking the perimeter, tending to his traps, bringing in firewood. But everything felt different, lighter. The weight he'd been carrying since that first knock on his door had lifted. Evelyn moved through the cabin with new energy, no longer looking over her shoulder every few minutes. She hummed as she worked, quiet, tuneless, but genuine. The sound of someone who'd remembered they were allowed to be happy. The children played in the snow, their laughter echoing off the valley walls. Jonah showed Lily how to make snow angels. She giggled as she lay down and swept her arms and legs, creating wings and robes in the white powder. Watching them from the window, Caleb felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest. Not quite happiness. That was still too foreign, too dangerous. But maybe contentment. The sense that for the first time in 15 years, his life was something more than just survival. As darkness fell, they gathered around the fire for dinner. The meal was simple, venison stew again becoming their staple. But it tasted better somehow, richer, more satisfying. "Mr. Blackwood knew your father," Evelyn said carefully as they ate. "You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to, but my father was Jonathan Rourke," Caleb said. He hadn't spoken these words aloud in years. They felt strange in his mouth. He owned a freight business in the valley, did well for himself, had plans for me to take over eventually. "What happened?" Caleb was quiet for a long moment. "There was an accident. A wagon overturned on a mountain pass. My father was driving. My younger brother was with him." He stared into the fire. "They both died. And I was supposed to have been there too. I was supposed to make that run with them. But I'd stayed behind because—" He stopped. Even after 15 years, the guilt was a living thing. "Because," Evelyn prompted gently, "because I was young and stupid, and I wanted to spend the day with a girl instead of working." The words came out harsh. "So my father took my brother, and they died, and I lived, and everyone in the valley looked at me and saw the son who should have died instead. That's not fair. Fair's got nothing to do with it. That's how it was. Every time I walked through town, I saw it in their eyes, the questions they didn't ask. Why him and not you? Why did the good ones die and the worthless ones survive?" Caleb's hands clenched. "So I left. Walked away from the business, from the valley, from everyone who knew me. Came up here where nobody could look at me like that anymore." "That's why you've been alone all this time," Evelyn said softly. "You've been punishing yourself." "Maybe. Or maybe I just learned that caring about people means watching them die. Either way, alone seemed safer." Jonah had been listening intently. "But you didn't stay alone. You helped us." "Yeah, well," Caleb managed a rough smile. "I'm not as smart as I thought I was." The boy grinned back. "I'm glad you're not smart." Despite everything, Caleb laughed. It was a rusty sound, unpracticed, but real. They finished dinner and cleaned up together. Lily fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted by the day's emotions. Jonah tried to stay awake, but lost the battle within an hour. Caleb and Evelyn sat by the fire in comfortable silence. Outside, the mountain was peaceful. Inside, the cabin was warm. "Thank you," Evelyn said again, "for telling me about your father. I know that wasn't easy. Felt like it was time. You told me your story. Seemed only fair to share mine. We've all got ghosts, don't we? Things we're running from." "Yeah, but maybe we don't have to run forever." She looked at him, really looked at him, and something passed between them. Not romance, not yet anyway, but understanding, recognition. Two broken people who'd found shelter in the same space. "Through the winter," she said. "Through the winter," he agreed. But both of them knew, even if they weren't ready to say it yet, that spring might not change anything. That this temporary arrangement might already be more permanent than either of them had planned. The fire burned low. The night deepened. And on the mountain that had been Caleb Rourke's prison for 15 years, something new was being built. Something fragile and uncertain, but undeniably real. A home. Not just a cabin. Not just shelter from the cold. A home. The confession came 3 weeks after Blackwood's men had descended the mountain for the last time. Caleb was teaching Jonah how to dress a rabbit they'd caught in one of the snare traps when Evelyn appeared in the doorway, her face pale and drawn. She'd been quiet all morning, moving through her chores with mechanical efficiency, and Caleb had noticed but hadn't pressed. Everyone was entitled to their dark days, especially after what they'd been through. But now she stood there twisting her hands together, and he knew something was wrong. "Can we talk?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Alone?" Caleb set down his knife and nodded to Jonah. "Keep working on that hide, slow and careful, like I showed you. I'll check your work when I get back." The boy nodded, his face serious with concentration. Caleb followed Evelyn outside, away from the cabin where the children couldn't hear. The air was sharp and cold, the kind that burned your lungs if you breathed too deep. Snow crunched under their boots. They walked in silence until they reached the edge of the clearing where the pines stood like sentinels. Evelyn stopped and turned to face him, her eyes red-rimmed. "I lied to Blackwood," she said, "and I lied to you." Caleb felt his stomach drop. "About what?" "About not knowing. About the money." She wrapped her arms around herself. "Thomas didn't hide it from me. He told me everything. He said the company owed him more than they paid, that he was just taking what was rightfully his. He said we'd use it to start over somewhere new, somewhere the children could have better lives." "Did you believe him?" "I wanted to." Her voice cracked. He'd been so different those last months. Angry all the time, drinking, staying out late. But when he talked about the money, about our future, he was like the man I married again. Hopeful. Excited. I thought maybe this was our chance to escape the life we'd built, to be something more. "Where's the money now?" Evelyn closed her eyes. "I don't know, that's the truth. He said he'd hidden it somewhere safe, somewhere no one would find it. He was going to tell me where after things settled down, but then..." She broke off. "Then he died. And I've been running ever since, terrified that someone would find out I knew, that they'd think I had it, that they'd hurt my children to make me tell them something I don't even know." Caleb was quiet for a long moment, processing this. Part of him was angry. She'd lied to him, put him in danger without full disclosure. But another part understood. She'd been protecting her children the only way she knew how. "Why tell me now?" he asked finally. "Because I can't keep lying, not to you. Not after everything you've done for us." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "You stood against armed men. You risked your life, and I repaid you with deception. You deserve the truth." "Does knowing change anything? The money's still gone. Blackwood's men are still gone. Your husband's still dead. But you're not gone. Not yet." She looked at him directly. "And I couldn't let you make a decision about us staying without knowing who we really are. What we really did." "We," Caleb repeated. "You keep saying we, but it was your husband who stole, your husband who lied to his employer. You just..." "What? Believed him when he said it was justified?" "I knew it was wrong." Her voice was fierce now, defensive. "But I also knew we were drowning. The debts, the drinking, the constant fear that we'd lose everything. Thomas offered me a way out and I took it. That makes me complicit. That makes me guilty too. Maybe. But guilt doesn't mean you deserved what came after." "Doesn't it?" She wiped angrily at her tears. "Thomas died. We lost everything anyway, and we brought danger to your door. Maybe that's exactly what I deserved." "Stop!" Caleb's voice was sharp enough to cut through her spiral. "You want to wallow in guilt? Fine. But don't pretend your children deserved any of it. They didn't choose their father's sins. They didn't ask to be hunted. All they did was exist." Evelyn's face crumpled. "I know. That's why I couldn't let them be taken. Whatever I've done, whatever mistakes I've made, they're innocent. So what do you want from me? Absolution? I'm not a priest. I want you to tell me if we need to leave." She straightened her shoulders, forced strength into her voice. "You said we could stay through winter, but that was before you knew the truth. If you want us gone, we'll go. Today. Right now. I won't blame you." Caleb stared at her. She meant it. He could see that. She was prepared to pack up her children and walk back down that mountain with winter still gripping the land, all because she'd told the truth and expected to be punished for it. "You're an idiot," he said. She blinked. "What? You think I care if you knew about the money? You think that changes anything?" He shook his head. Your husband stole from a company. That's between him and whatever judgment comes after death. You knew about it and stayed quiet. Maybe that makes you a bad person. Maybe it makes you practical. I don't know, and I don't care. But I lied to you. Yeah, you did. And if we're keeping score, I've probably lied about 1,000 things in my life. Does that mean I deserve to freeze to death on a mountain? He softened his tone. Look, I'm not going to stand here and tell you what you did was right, but I'm also not going to pretend I don't understand why you did it. You were scared. You were protecting your kids. People do a lot worse for less reason. So you don't want us to leave? Hell no, I don't want you to leave. The children are finally settling in. Jonah's learning real skills. Lily actually smiled yesterday. Really smiled. Not just that frightened thing she does. You're going to drag them back out into the cold because you feel guilty? I just thought you thought wrong. Caleb stepped closer. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to go back inside and finish whatever you were doing. You're going to stop beating yourself up over choices that are done and buried. And you're going to stay here, through winter like we agreed, and probably longer because where else are you going to go? I don't understand. Why aren't you angry? Who says I'm not? I don't love being lied to, but I'm also not stupid enough to throw away 3 people who've actually made this place feel like something other than a tomb. He paused. You want honesty? Fine. Having you here, having all of you, it's the first time in 15 years I've felt like maybe I'm not completely broken. So yeah, you lied. And yeah, I'm annoyed. But I'm not sending you away. That what you needed to hear? Evelyn stared at him for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, she laughed. It was a small, choked sound, but genuine. You're a strange man, Caleb Rourke. Been called worse. Most men would have thrown us out. Most men didn't spend 15 years alone on a mountain learning that pride and righteousness are cold comfort when you're by yourself. He started back toward the cabin. Now come on. It's too cold to stand around having heart-to-hearts, and Jonah's probably ruined that rabbit hide by now. She followed him, and as they walked, some of the tension that had been building for weeks seemed to dissipate into the frozen air. The truth was out. The worst had been confessed. And somehow, impossibly, they were still standing. Inside the cabin, Jonah had indeed made a mess of the hide, cutting too deep in places and leaving too much meat in others. But he'd tried, and that counted for something. Caleb showed him again, patient and thorough, while Evelyn started preparing lunch. Lily was sitting by the fire with her makeshift doll, but when Evelyn came in, the little girl looked up with worried eyes. Is everything okay, Mama? Yes, baby, everything's fine. Are we leaving? The question hung in the air. Caleb could feel both children watching, waiting for the answer that would determine their immediate future. No, Evelyn said firmly. We're not leaving. We're staying right here. The relief on their faces was palpable. Jonah went back to his work with renewed focus. Lily returned to her doll. And just like that, the crisis passed. But something had shifted. The secret that had been weighing on Evelyn was gone, and in its absence, the cabin felt lighter, more honest. Like the foundation they'd been building on was finally solid instead of sand. The weeks that followed fell into an easy rhythm. Caleb continued teaching Jonah everything he knew about survival, tracking, hunting, reading weather, finding water under ice. The boy was a quick study, soaking up knowledge with the intensity of someone who understood that these skills might mean the difference between life and death someday. Lily remained shy, but she began following Caleb around the cabin, watching him work with those big, solemn eyes. One afternoon, as he was repairing a broken snare, she approached with her doll held out. His arm came off, she said quietly. Can you fix him? The doll was crude, just scraps of fabric sewn together, but she held it like it was precious. One of the arms had indeed come loose, the thread frayed and broken. Caleb took it carefully. I think so. Let me see what I can do. He found some leather cord and used it to reattach the arm, stronger than thread. He even added some decorative stitching, something he'd learned years ago from a trapper who'd shown him how to repair his own clothes in the field. When he handed it back, Lily's face lit up like sunrise. Thank you, she whispered. Then, before he could react, she hugged his leg quickly and ran back to her mother. It was such a small thing, but it hit Caleb with surprising force. When was the last time someone had hugged him? When was the last time he'd done something kind just to see another person smile? He couldn't remember. Evelyn had seen the exchange. That evening, after the children were asleep, she sat down next to him by the fire. "She trusts you now," she said quietly. That's not easy for her. After Thomas died, after everything that happened, she stopped trusting men. Any men. She'd flinch when they got too close, hide behind me whenever we passed someone on the street. I didn't do anything special. You did. You gave her time, space. You never pushed, and you fixed her doll like it mattered. She paused. That's everything, Caleb. That's how you earn trust with someone who's been hurt. He didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing, just stared into the fire and let the warmth seep into his bones. Can I ask you something? Evelyn's voice was tentative. Sure. What was her name, the girl you stayed behind for, the day your father and brother died? Caleb was quiet for so long she probably thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he said, Sarah Mitchell. She was the minister's daughter, prettiest girl in the valley. Did you love her? I thought I did. I was 18. Everything felt like love at that age. He smiled bitterly. After the accident, she couldn't even look at me. None of them could. I was a reminder of what they'd lost. My father had been important, well-liked. My brother was just a kid, and I was the one who lived because I'd been thinking with something other than my brain. That's not fair. Life rarely is. He stirred the fire with a stick. But I learned something from it. People will forgive you almost anything except surviving when someone they loved didn't. That kind of resentment, it never goes away. It just festers. Is that why you never went back, not even once? What would be the point? The business was sold. My mother moved east to live with her sister. There was nothing left for me there. He set down the stick. Besides, by the time I might have considered it, I'd been gone so long I didn't know how to be around people anymore. This mountain, this cabin, it became the only thing that made sense. Until we showed up. Until you showed up, he agreed, and turned everything upside down. Do you regret it? Letting us in? Caleb considered the question seriously. 3 weeks ago, his life had been simple, predictable, safe. Now it was complicated and messy and full of people who needed things from him. No, he said finally. I don't regret it. Even knowing I lied? Even knowing you lied. He looked at her. We've all got our sins, Evelyn. Mine just happened before I came up here. Yours happened while you were down in the valley. Doesn't make either of us beyond redemption. She smiled, and it transformed her face. For the first time, he could see the woman she must have been before life had ground her down. Young, hopeful, beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with features and everything to do with spirit. Thank you, she said softly, for not giving up on us. Thank you for knocking on my door. It was a simple exchange, but it felt like a promise, like a foundation being laid for something neither of them was quite ready to name yet. As winter deepened, the cabin became a world unto itself. Snow piled higher against the walls until the windows were half buried. Some days they couldn't open the door at all and had to dig themselves out. But inside, life continued with surprising normalcy. Caleb showed them how to make snowshoes from bent willow and leather strips, how to identify animal tracks even under fresh powder, how to find deadfall for firewood that would burn hot and clean. Evelyn taught the children their letters, using charcoal on flat pieces of bark since they had no paper. She told stories in the evening, fairy tales she remembered from her own childhood, embellished and expanded to fill the long, dark hours. Lily began to talk more, not constantly, but in small bursts of conversation that showed she was coming out of her shell. She asked questions about the mountain, about the animals, about why snow was white and ice was clear. Jonah grew taller, his frame filling out from regular meals and hard work. He could shoot now, not perfectly, but well enough to bring down small game, could track deer through the forest, could start a fire in wet conditions. He was becoming the kind of young man who could survive anywhere. And Caleb found himself changing too. The hard edges he'd cultivated for 15 years were smoothing out. He caught himself smiling more, talking more, making jokes that weren't bitter or self-deprecating. The cabin that had been his fortress was becoming something else. A home. One evening in late February, as they sat around the fire after dinner, Jonah asked the question that had probably been building for weeks. What happens when spring comes? Everyone went still. It was the unspoken thing, the reality they'd all been avoiding. Winter couldn't last forever. Eventually, the snow would melt and the trails would clear and decisions would have to be made. "What do you mean?" Evelyn asked, though she knew exactly what he meant. "Are we leaving, going back down to the valley, finding somewhere else to live?" Jonah looked between his mother and Caleb. "Or are we staying?" "We can't stay forever," Evelyn said automatically. "This is Caleb's home. We've imposed long enough." "Have you?" Caleb's voice was mild. "Because it hasn't felt like an imposition. Still, we need to make our own way eventually, find our own place." "Why?" The question was so simple it stopped her cold. "What? Why do you need to find your own place? What's wrong with this one?" "It's not ours." "Could be, if you wanted." Evelyn stared at him. "What are you saying?" Caleb took a breath. He hadn't planned this, hadn't rehearsed the words, but they came anyway, surprisingly easy. "I'm saying stay, not just through winter, permanently. Make this your home. Make it our home." He looked at the children, then back at Evelyn. "I've got more space than I need, more supplies than one person can use. And honestly, I've gotten used to having people around. The quiet was starting to feel more like loneliness." "Caleb, we can't just—" "Why not? Give me one good reason." "Because it's not proper. An unmarried woman living with a man. People talk." "What people? The nearest settlement is 40 miles away. Who's going to know? Who's going to care?" "I'd know. I'd care." But her voice lacked conviction. "Would you? Really? Or is that just what you think you're supposed to say?" He leaned forward. "Look, I'm not asking for anything improper. I'm not expecting— This isn't about that. I'm just saying you need a place to live, and I've got one. The children need stability, and I can provide it. Why make everything harder than it needs to be?" "What would we even do here? We can't just live off your charity." "Who said anything about charity? You already earn your keep 10 times over. You cook, you clean, you've organized this place better than it's been in 15 years. Jonah helps with the trapping and hunting. Even Lily contributes. She's been collecting kindling and helping with the mending." He sat back. "This isn't charity. This is partnership. We all contribute. We all benefit." Jonah was practically vibrating with excitement. "Can we, Ma? Please? I don't want to leave. I like it here. I'm learning so much, and I feel safe for the first time since Pa died." Those last words hung heavy in the air. Safe. Such a simple thing. Such an impossible thing for a child to have gone without. Lily had been quiet, but now she spoke up in that tiny voice. "I don't want to go either. I like Caleb, and I like our room, and—" She stopped, suddenly shy. "And what, baby?" Evelyn prompted gently. "And I don't want to be scared anymore." Evelyn's face crumpled. She pulled Lily close, pressing her face against her daughter's hair. When she looked up again, her eyes were wet. "I don't want you to be scared either," she whispered. "So stay," Caleb said quietly. "Stay and let me help you build something, not just shelter, not just survival, but an actual life. The kind where children can be children instead of constantly looking over their shoulders. And what about you?" Evelyn's voice was barely audible. "What do you get out of this?" Caleb thought about the question seriously. What did he get? A full house instead of an empty one, voices instead of silence, the sound of laughter echoing off the valley walls, the feeling of purpose he'd lost 15 years ago when he walked away from everything. "I get to stop being alone," he said finally. "I get to remember what it feels like to be part of something bigger than just survival. I get to teach Jonah how to be a good man. I get to see Lily grow up without fear, and I get—" He stopped, surprised by the emotion in his own voice. "I get a family. Even if it's not traditional, even if it's not what most people would recognize, it's still a family." Evelyn was crying now, silently, tears streaming down her face. "You really mean that?" "Every word. We'd have to set rules, boundaries, make sure everything stays appropriate. Whatever you need. And if it doesn't work out, if we find it's too difficult or complicated, we can revisit the decision." "Fair enough." She looked at her children. Both of them were watching her with pleading eyes, desperately hoping she'd say yes. Then she looked at Caleb, This man who'd taken them in when no one else would, who'd fought for them, who'd offered them not just shelter, but belonging. "All right," she said finally. "We'll stay." The children erupted in cheers. Jonah jumped up and hugged his mother, then, hesitantly, hugged Caleb too. Lily wrapped her small arms around both of them, giggling. And Caleb, who hadn't been hugged by anyone in 15 years, found himself surrounded by warmth and noise and joy. It was overwhelming, terrifying, perfect. That night, after everyone else had gone to sleep, Caleb sat by the fire and thought about how drastically his life had changed in just a few short months. He'd spent 15 years convinced that isolation was the answer, that distance kept you safe, that caring about people only led to pain. But these three people, this woman and her children who'd stumbled into his life half-frozen and desperate, had proven him wrong. They'd shown him that connection could be healing instead of harmful, that letting people in didn't have to mean inevitable loss. Maybe he'd still lose them someday. Maybe spring would come and they'd change their minds. Maybe danger would find them again. But for now, in this moment, they were his, and he was theirs. And that was enough. Spring came slowly to the mountain, reluctant and hesitant, like it wasn't quite sure it was welcome. The snow began to recede in patches first, revealing dark earth and the skeletal remains of last year's undergrowth. Water ran everywhere, trickling down rocks, pooling in depressions, turning the trail into a muddy river. The air warmed degree by degree, and with it came the smells of awakening, pine sap and wet soil, and the green promise of new growth. Caleb stood in the doorway one morning in early March, watching the transformation. Behind him, the cabin was full of the sounds of life, Evelyn humming as she prepared breakfast, Lily chattering to her doll, Jonah sharpening his knife the way Caleb had taught him. 4 months ago, these sounds would have felt like an invasion. Now they felt like breathing. "The trails will be clear soon," Evelyn said, coming to stand beside him. She'd changed, too, over the winter. The gauntness had left her face, replaced by healthy color. Her eyes had lost that haunted, hunted look. She stood straighter now, moved with confidence instead of fear. "About 2 weeks, I'd guess," Caleb said. "Maybe 3 if we get another late storm." "Will people start coming up? Trappers, hunters, travelers?" "Some. Not many. This isn't exactly on any main routes, but yeah, we'll see folks occasionally once the weather holds." She was quiet for a moment, watching the water drip from the eaves. "Are you having second thoughts about us staying?" "No. Are you?" "Every day." She smiled to soften the words. "Not because I want to leave, but because I keep waiting for the moment you realize what you've signed up for. A widow with 2 children and a past that could still come back to haunt us. That's a lot for any man to take on. I've had 4 months to realize it. If I was going to run, I'd have done it by now." "You can't run from your own cabin. Could have made you so miserable you'd have left on your own. I didn't. That should tell you something." She laughed, and the sound was light and free. "You're a stubborn man, Caleb Rourke." "Takes one to know one, Evelyn Hale." The weeks that followed brought work. Hard, exhausting, necessary work. Caleb had let maintenance slide over the winter, focusing on survival instead of upkeep. Now there were repairs to make, supplies to replenish, preparations for the coming seasons. Jonah worked alongside him every day, learning how to repair the roof where winter had damaged the shingles, how to clear the drainage channels so spring runoff wouldn't flood the cabin, how to prepare the garden plot for planting. The boy had shot up over the winter, gaining height and muscle. At 11 now, he looked older, carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who knew his own capabilities. "When can I check the far trapline by myself?" Jonah asked one afternoon, as they worked on rebuilding a section of fence that had collapsed under the snow. "You thinking you're ready?" "I know the route. I know how to reset the traps. I can track back if I get turned around." Caleb studied him. The boy met his gaze steadily, not challenging but not backing down either. "It's a 6-hour round trip, rough terrain. If you twist an ankle or run into trouble, you're a long way from help." "I know, but I can handle it." "Your ma know you're asking?" "Not yet. Wanted to see what you said first." Smart. Jonah had learned to navigate the household dynamics, understanding that Caleb and Evelyn made decisions together now, that neither one would undermine the other. It was a kind of partnership that had developed naturally over the winter, built on mutual respect and necessity. "Tell you what," Caleb said, You take the near trap line by yourself for the next 2 weeks. Show me you can handle the responsibility, manage your time, deal with problems on your own. If you do well, we'll talk about the far line." Jonah's face lit up.
Really? Really? But you mess up, you lose the privilege. This isn't a game. Those traps are how we supplement our food stores. They matter. "I won't mess up, I promise." And he didn't. Over the next 2 weeks, Jonah proved himself capable and responsible. He checked the traps on schedule, reset them properly, brought back 3 rabbits and a fox. He reported problems accurately. One trap had been sprung by a falling branch, another had caught and lost a marten because the chain was too weak. He suggested improvements, asked thoughtful questions, showed initiative. Caleb found himself feeling something unexpected: pride. Not the distant, theoretical pride you might feel for a stranger's accomplishments, but the deep personal pride of watching someone you cared about succeed. When he told Jonah he was approved for the far trap line, the boy's reaction was pure joy. He didn't whoop or holler, he'd learned restraint from Caleb, but his grin was incandescent. "Thank you. I won't let you down. I know you won't." That evening, Evelyn cornered Caleb outside while the children were occupied inside. "You're good with him," she said without preamble. "Better than his own father was, honestly. Thomas loved him, but he didn't know how to show it. Didn't know how to teach him to be a man instead of just a boy. I'm just showing him what I know." "It's more than that. You're showing him what it means to work hard, to be responsible, to keep your word. You're showing him that a man can be strong without being cruel, can be competent without being arrogant." She paused. "You're showing him the kind of man he should grow up to be. That's everything, Caleb. That's what fathers do." The word hung between them. Father. Caleb had never thought of himself that way, never expected to be that for anyone. But hearing Evelyn say it, he realized she was right. Somewhere over the winter, without planning it or acknowledging it, he'd become a father figure to Jonah. And to Lily, in a different way, she'd started calling him Caleb, but the trust in her eyes when she looked at him was the trust children have for the adults who keep them safe. "I never thought I'd have this," he said quietly. "A family. After everything that happened, after I came up here, I figured I'd forfeited that chance." "Maybe you didn't forfeit it. Maybe you were just waiting for the right people to find you. Or maybe the right people got lost in a snowstorm and had nowhere else to go." She smiled. "Lucky for all of us, they did." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint the peaks in shades of orange and gold. The mountain was beautiful in spring, coming alive after months of frozen dormancy. New growth pushed up through the soil. Birds returned from their southern migrations. The whole world felt renewed, full of possibility. "Caleb," Evelyn said, her voice suddenly serious, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen all the way through before you say anything." He tensed, old instincts flaring. "All right. I know we said this was just partnership, practical arrangement, separate quarters, appropriate boundaries, all of that." She took a breath. "And I've tried, really tried to keep it that way. But the truth is," she stopped, gathering courage. "The truth is, I've developed feelings for you, real ones, the kind that go beyond gratitude or friendship or companionship." Caleb's heart was suddenly pounding. He'd felt the shift too over the winter. The way his eyes tracked her movements around the cabin, the way her smile could change his entire mood, the way he'd started thinking in terms of we instead of I, without even noticing the transition. But he'd assumed, hoped maybe, that it was one-sided, that she'd never see him as anything more than a convenient provider, a safe harbor, but not a destination. "I'm not expecting anything," Evelyn continued quickly. "I'm not asking you to feel the same way. I couldn't keep pretending. It felt dishonest. You've been nothing but truthful with me, even when it was hard. I owe you the same." "You done?" Caleb asked. She nodded, looking nervous. "Good, because it's my turn." He turned to face her fully. "I never had a wife. Never came close. After the accident, after I came up here, I told myself I was better off alone, that I wasn't fit for family or love or any of that. That part of me had died with my father and brother. Caleb, I'm not done." He softened his tone. "But then you showed up, you and your children, and slowly, without me realizing it, you brought that part of me back to life.
The part that wants to take care of people, that wants to build something lasting, that wants to wake up every morning and know there's someone who cares if I make it through the day. He reached out and took her hand. It was small in his, work roughened, but warm. So yeah, Evelyn, I've got feelings too. Have for a while now. Was just too stubborn or scared to say anything. Her eyes filled with tears. Really? Really. But we need to be smart about this. Figure out what it means, how to handle it with the children around, all of that. The children adore you, especially Lily. She told me last week that she wishes you were her real papa. The words hit Caleb like a physical blow. She said that? She did. And Jonah, he doesn't say it out loud, but I see how he looks at you, how he copies the way you stand, the way you talk. You're his hero, Caleb, his model for what a man should be. That's a lot of pressure. That's a lot of love. She squeezed his hand. So what do we do now? Caleb thought about it. The practical considerations, the social implications, the simple question of what two people did when they realized they wanted to build a life together. We take it slow, he said finally. Court properly, even if there's no one around to witness it. Give the children time to adjust to the idea, and eventually, if it still feels right, we make it official. Find a traveling minister, or make the trek down to the settlement. Do it right. You want to marry me? Her voice was barely a whisper. I want to marry you, want to adopt those children if their dead father's memory can forgive me for it. Want to stop pretending this is temporary and accept that it's permanent. He cupped her face with his free hand. But only if that's what you want too. I won't trap you here. If you need to leave to find your own path, I'll understand. I don't want to leave. I want to stay. I want to build a life here with you. She leaned into his touch. I want my children to grow up safe and loved. I want to wake up every morning knowing we're home, really home. Then that's what we'll do. They stood there as the sun dipped below the peaks, hands clasped, foreheads touching. It wasn't a dramatic declaration or a passionate embrace. It was quieter than that, more solid, the kind of foundation you could build a lifetime on. When they finally went back inside, the children looked up from where they'd been playing a game with carved wooden pieces Caleb had made. Everything okay? Jonah asked, his expression slightly worried. Everything's perfect, Evelyn said. But we need to talk to you both about something. Something important. They sat down together at the table. Lily climbed into Evelyn's lap while Jonah sat across from them, suddenly looking very adult and serious. You know how we've been living here with Caleb all winter? Evelyn began. Both children nodded. And you know how we all get along well, work together, take care of each other? Another nod. Well, Caleb and I have been talking, and we think we'd like to make this permanent, to be a real family, which means Caleb and I would get married eventually, and you two would... She paused, choosing her words carefully. You'd have Caleb in your lives as more than just a friend, as someone who's committed to raising you and protecting you, like a papa, Lily interrupted, her eyes huge. Yes, baby, like a papa. Lily looked at Caleb. You'd be my papa? Caleb's throat was tight. If you'd want me to be. She considered this with the seriousness only a 6-year-old could muster. Then she nodded firmly. I want that. You're nice and you fix things and you make Mama smile. That's what papas should do. Despite the emotional weight of the moment, Caleb had to smile. Well, when you put it like that. Jonah had been quiet through the exchange. Now he spoke up, his voice careful. What about our real PA? I know he did bad things, but he was still our pa. Does this mean we have to forget him? No, Caleb said firmly. It doesn't mean that at all. Your father was your father. Nothing changes that. I'm not trying to replace him or make you forget him. I'm offering to be someone who's here now, someone who can fill the space he left behind. But you'd be our pa too. We'd have two? Some people do. Is that so strange? Jonah thought about it. I guess not. It's just different. Different isn't always bad. No, Jonah said slowly. I guess it's not. He looked at Caleb directly. You've been teaching me a lot. Important stuff. Stuff my pa never knew how to teach me. And you've been good to Ma and Lily. You make us feel safe. He paused.
I think it would be okay. You being our pa. I think I'd like that. Relief flooded through Caleb. He hadn't realized how much he'd needed the boy's approval until he had it. Thank you, he said simply. That means a lot. But you have to promise something, Jonah added, suddenly fierce. You have to promise you won't leave, that you won't get tired of us or change your mind or die on us. We've lost enough people. I can't. His voice cracked. I can't lose anyone else. Evelyn pulled him close with her free arm, holding both her children. Baby, no one can promise they won't die. That's not how life works. I know, but I can promise I won't leave by choice, Caleb interrupted. I can promise that this mountain is my home and you're my family, and I intend to be here for as long as I'm breathing. Is that enough? Jonah nodded, swiping at his eyes. Yeah, that's enough. They talked for another hour, working through details and concerns and questions. How would it work? When would they get married? What would their names be? Could they tell people, or was it a secret? Caleb let Evelyn handle most of it. She was better with the emotional nuances, the reassurances the children needed. He just sat there, amazed that this was his life now. That these three people who'd been strangers 6 months ago were now his entire world. Eventually, the children were sent to bed, though Lily insisted on hugging Caleb goodnight first, her small arms barely reaching around his waist. Night, Papa, she whispered. The word nearly broke him. Night, little one. After they'd settled, Caleb and Evelyn sat by the fire again. This time, she leaned against his shoulder, his arm around her. It felt natural. Right. Like they'd been doing this for years instead of minutes. I can't believe this is real, she murmured. 6 months ago, I was running for my life. Now I'm sitting here planning a wedding. Life's strange that way. You're not having second thoughts? About marrying you? No. About taking on 2 children? No. About having a house full of people after 15 years alone? He paused. Maybe a little, but the good kind of thoughts. The kind where you can't quite believe your luck. We're the lucky ones. If you hadn't opened that door, if you'd turned us away. But I didn't, and you're here, and we're making this work. He pulled her closer. That's all that matters. Not the what ifs, just what is. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the fire burn down to embers. Outside, the mountain was settling in for the night. Spring peepers had started calling from the creek, their voices carrying through the open window. Somewhere distant, a wolf howled. When should we do it? Evelyn asked. The wedding? There's a circuit preacher who comes through the settlements every few months. We could try to catch him next time he's in the area, or we could make the trip down to the valley. I don't want to leave the mountain. Not yet. Maybe not ever. This place? It saved us. It feels wrong to leave it. Then we wait for the preacher. Shouldn't be more than a month or 2. That's a long time. We've waited this long. What's another few weeks? He kissed the top of her head. Besides, gives us time to prepare. Make it proper. Maybe even build you and the children a proper bedroom so we're not all living in one room anymore. I'd like that. Lily's getting old enough to need her own space. They made plans, quiet and practical, their voices low in the darkness. Where to build the addition, how to furnish it, what supplies they'd need. It was domestic and ordinary and utterly perfect. As the night deepened, Evelyn finally stirred. I should go to bed. Morning comes early. It does. But neither of them moved. They sat there, reluctant to break the moment, to return to their separate sleeping spaces and the illusion of boundaries they'd maintained for propriety's sake. Soon, Evelyn said softly. Soon we won't have to sleep apart. Soon, Caleb agreed. She stood finally, and he stood with her. At the edge of the curtained-off bedroom area, she turned back. Thank you, Caleb, for everything, for opening your door that night, for fighting for us, for giving us a home, for... Her voice caught. For choosing us. Thank you for knocking, he said, for trusting me enough to stay, for making this place feel like more than just a cabin in the woods. She smiled, then slipped behind the curtain. Caleb returned to his chair and his rifle and his habit of keeping watch. But for the first time in 15 years, he wasn't watching for danger. He was watching over something precious, something worth protecting. His family.
The weeks that followed were a strange blend of ordinary and extraordinary. Daily life continued much as it had, checking traps, tending the garden they'd planted, maintaining the cabin. But underneath it all was a current of joy, of anticipation, of something fundamental shifting into place. Caleb started building the addition, working in the evenings after the day's other work was done. Jonah helped, learning carpentry alongside everything else. They framed it out together, raised the walls, fit the roof. It was slow going, but satisfying, creating something permanent, something that said, "This is our home, and we're staying." Lily appointed herself decorator, collecting wildflowers and interesting rocks and bits of colored glass from an abandoned claim she'd found to make the new room pretty. She had strong opinions about where everything should go, and Evelyn indulged her, letting her arrange and rearrange to her heart's content. In late April, word came through a passing trapper that the circuit preacher would be in the settlement of Stone Creek in 3 weeks. It was a full day's journey, longer with children, but doable. They made the trip on a bright May morning, the 4 of them traveling together down the mountain for the first time. It felt significant, leaving their sanctuary. But it also felt right. Like they were bringing their family into the wider world, making it official not just between themselves, but in the eyes of whatever authority mattered. Stone Creek was barely a settlement, maybe 20 buildings clustered around a creek crossing. But it had a general store and a boarding house, and most importantly, a small building that served as church on Sundays and meeting hall the rest of the week. The preacher was a weathered man in his 60s named Reverend Walsh. He listened to their story, edited for propriety, without judgment. "You want to get married right away?" he asked. "If possible," Evelyn said. "And the children? You're adopting them legal?" "That's the intent," Caleb confirmed. "Once we're married." Walsh nodded slowly. "I can marry you today. The adoption papers, those are trickier. You'll need to file them with the territorial office. Might take months to process. But I can write up a letter of intent, have you sign it, keep it with my records. Won't be legal, but it's a start." "That'll do," Caleb said. They were married that afternoon in the small church, with Reverend Walsh presiding and 2 strangers pulled in from the street to serve as witnesses. Evelyn wore her cleanest dress. Caleb had trimmed his beard and borrowed a jacket from the boarding house keeper. The children stood beside them, Jonah solemn and Lily practically vibrating with excitement. The ceremony was brief. No flowers, no music, no grand declarations. Just simple vows spoken quietly in a room that smelled of pine and candle wax. "Do you, Caleb Rourke, take this woman to be your wife, to have and to hold from this day forward?" "I do." "Do you, Evelyn Hale, take this man to be your husband, to have and to hold from this day forward?" "I do." "Then by the power vested in me by the territory, I pronounce you husband and wife." It was done. Official. Real. They signed the papers, paid the Reverend his fee, thanked the bewildered witnesses who'd been drafted into service. Then they walked out into the afternoon sunshine as a family, not by blood or circumstance, but by choice. That night, they stayed at the boarding house. Caleb and Evelyn shared a room for the first time, while the children slept next door. It felt strange and wonderful, and slightly terrifying all at once. "Are you happy?" Caleb asked as they lay together in the darkness. "Happier than I ever thought I'd be again," Evelyn said. "You?" Yeah, I am." "No regrets?" "Not a single one." She curled against him, her head on his chest. "I love you, Caleb Rourke. I should have said it before now, but I do. I love you." "I love you too, Evelyn Rourke." He smiled in the darkness. "Going to take some getting used to, that name." "We've got time, all the time in the world." They made the return journey 2 days later, taking their time, stopping to rest when the children got tired. When they finally crested the last ridge and saw the cabin nestled in its valley, all 4 of them stopped to look. "Home," Lily said simply. And it was. Not just a cabin anymore, not just a refuge or a temporary shelter, but a real home, filled with love and laughter and the messy, beautiful chaos of family life. They settled back into routine easily. The addition was finished by mid-June, giving the children their own space. The garden flourished under Evelyn's care. Jonah continued to grow more skilled and confident.
Lily lost her last traces of fear, becoming a bright, chattering presence who collected friends among the forest creatures, a tame squirrel, a curious fox kit, birds that would eat from her hand. And Caleb learned what it meant to not be alone. He learned the joy of waking up to voices instead of silence, the satisfaction of teaching Jonah a new skill and watching him master it, the sweetness of Lily's goodnight hugs, the contentment of falling asleep with Evelyn beside him, warm and solid and real. He learned that letting people in didn't mean inevitable loss, that caring about others could be a source of strength instead of weakness, that family wasn't just about blood. It was about choice and commitment and showing up every single day. One evening in late summer, as they all sat outside watching the sunset, Jonah spoke up. Pa? The name still felt new in his mouth, but he used it more often now. Can I ask you something? Sure. Do you ever regret it, letting us stay that first night, all the trouble we caused, the danger with Blackwood's men, having to share your space? Caleb thought about the question, thought about the 15 years he'd spent alone, convinced that isolation was safety, thought about the life he might have continued living if Evelyn hadn't knocked on his door that stormy night. No, he said finally, I don't regret a single second. You three, you gave me my life back. I was just existing up here, surviving. You made me start living again. Even though you never had a wife before, even though you're stuck with us now? Caleb laughed. Especially because of that. I spent a long time thinking I didn't deserve a family, that I'd forfeited that chance. But maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was just waiting for the right family to find me. Evelyn reached over and took his hand. Lily leaned against his side. Jonah smiled, that rare, full smile that transformed his serious face. And Caleb Rourke, the man who'd lived alone on a mountain for 15 years, the man who'd convinced himself he was better off without connections or complications, realized something profound. He'd spent 15 years building walls to keep people out. It had taken one knock on the door to bring them all down. And he'd never been more grateful for anything in his entire life. The mountain stood eternal above them, its peaks painted gold by the dying sun. The valley spread out below, green and alive and full of promise. And in the cabin they'd made into a home. A family sat together, not bound by blood or obligation, but by choice and love, and the simple fact that they'd found each other when they needed it most. Caleb had said he'd never had a wife. That was true, once, but not anymore. Now he had everything.